In 2019, Ford began rolling out a newly designed version of its prized Ford Explorer, one of the best-selling sport utilities of all time, and a vehicle widely considered a cash cow for the automaker. And then the whole thing went horribly wrong. Now the Explorer is trailing rivals in sales, and Ford is reassuring investors it expects future launches to go more smoothly. It all comes at a time when Ford is trying to prove to investors it has a strong vision for its future and the ability to execute it. And the products Ford is set to launch in the next several quarters are widely believed to be extremely important as brands increasingly rely on SUVs and trucks, and competition in those segments grows stiff. The Ford Explorer is one of the most popular and significant sport utility vehicles in history. Released in 1990 for the 1991 model year, the Explorer was meant to be the successor to the Ford Bronco II, a smaller version of the automaker's full-size Bronco sport utility vehicle. While it could venture off pavement, Ford packaged the Explorer for how people, really families, intended to actually use it. It was easy to get in and out of, had a comfortable rear seat, and a well-appointed interior. From the beginning, the Explorer was available in several trim levels, including an upscale Eddie Bauer edition. It was an immediate success. The vehicle sold 250,000 units in its first full year on sale in 1991. In terms of volume, the Explorer became Ford's flagship SUV during the first SUV boom of the 1990s. It also far outpaced competitors, even senior ones, such as the Jeep Grand Cherokee and Chevrolet Blazer. In 1992, Jeep sold 128,960 Grand Cherokees in the U.S. Chevy sold 147,742 Blazers. But Ford sold 306,681 Explorers. Later, there was even a pickup version, the Explorer Sport Track, that debuted for the 2001 model year and continued until 2010. The Sport Track was an early take on now popular four-door pickup trucks with SUV-like interiors and ride quality. Throughout its history, the Explorer became a kind of blueprint for trends that were later adopted by the industry as SUVs became more popular. Early versions of the Explorer were rear-wheel drive and built on truck platforms. But the Explorer evolved as consumers increasingly sought SUVs as replacements for the family minivan and station wagon rather than off-road capable workhorses. In 2011, Ford released an Explorer that was built on a unibody platform, a platform design at the time used most often for passenger cars. Up to that point, Ford had built the Explorer like a truck. The vehicle's body was bolted onto a ladder-like frame. Making the Explorer a unibody-based vehicle improved the ride quality as well as fuel efficiency. But it also meant the Explorer would be front-wheel drive in its base model. It was a highly unusual move for a sport utility vehicle at the time. But many other SUVs have since adopted the unibody design approach.
Consumers didn't have a need to take these things off-road as much. Really, they were using them in the city, in the suburbs, and similarly, demand for greater fuel economy due to rising fuel prices at the time meant that consumers really were more than willing to trade tough truck capability for better fuel economy, as well as a drive experience that was much more like a passenger car as opposed to a rough and tumble truck.
There were some low points in the Explorer's history, very low points. The vehicle became embroiled in one of the worst scandals in Ford's history. Reports started surfacing in the late 1990s that the Firestone tires on Ford Explorers were failing at high temperatures. The crisis resulted in more than 270 deaths and 800 injuries in the United States alone. It prompted congressional investigations, millions of dollars in settlements and legal costs, and forced several executives to resign. Still, Explorers have sold in six-figure volumes annually throughout most of the vehicle's history.
Certainly, the Explorer nameplate did get tarnished at that time. Now, it's almost 20 years later, and most people have forgotten about that. So I don't think most people are thinking about rollovers and tire blowouts when they think of Explorer now, which I think goes to show the strength of the Explorer nameplate. I mean, when people think about family SUVs, Explorer is still one of the first things that comes to mind in the consumer's mind.
Ford redesigned the Explorer for the 2020 model year, its sixth generation of the SUV and its first major redesign in 8 years. At the time, the Explorer was the top-selling midsize SUV in the United States. The redesigned 2020 Explorer was going to be a rear-wheel drive vehicle in its base model with unibody construction, a combination of elements found in previous generations. The rear-wheel drive would give the SUV better towing capability and arguably better handling, while keeping the ride quality and some of the other advantages of a car-like unibody vehicle. Ford added a hybrid version for the first time, with a design that stuck the battery in the vehicle's chassis. There were premium trim levels too. Ford said it was the broadest Explorer lineup yet. A souped-up version came with the automaker's ST badge, a label Ford gives to cars and trucks with high-performance capabilities. High-performance SUVs have become more common as the auto market overall increasingly favors trucks and utilities over sedans and sport coupes. Ford also used the redesigned Explorer platform for 2 other models. One was the Lincoln Aviator. Ford has been revamping the sometimes successful and sometimes struggling Lincoln brand since at least 2015, when it released a concept version of its famous Lincoln Continental sedan that turned heads in the industry. After that, the luxury Lincoln brand found tremendous success with a redesigned version of its Navigator full-size SUV. The Aviator is a key vehicle in Lincoln's latest attempt at a revival.
And from a product perspective, that Aviator is really, really impressive. I mean, it is a true first-class luxury SUV. It demonstrates a level of commitment by Ford to the Lincoln brand in a way that I haven't seen in decades, really. The product is really, really well done. So that makes these early launch issues all that much more unfortunate, because it's a vehicle that carries a lot of promise. It's a vehicle that Lincoln is depending on very, very heavily to really turn that brand around.
The other vehicle built on the new Explorer platform was a version of the sport utility meant for law enforcement, called the Police Interceptor. Ford spent $1 billion retooling its plant in Chicago, Illinois for the new Explorer, calling it one of the most complex renovations in the company's history. Almost all of the workstations in the factory had to be changed for the new model, Ford had said at the time.
This place has been completely revamped.
It took a month to clear out everything and replace it with a brand new production line.
Problems already started to pop up early in the vehicle's rollout. The company had to issue a recall on Explorers and Aviators in August and another on Explorers in October. News reports also surfaced of customers having problems with Aviators and Explorers. The company resorted to sending vehicles from the Chicago factory to its Flat Rock, Michigan plant for further work. At the time, Ford said this type of work was not out of the ordinary. Opinions on how well Ford launches go in general can sometimes vary, depending on what someone is measuring. Consumer Reports, which has its own metrics for measuring reliability, has said Ford, like other American automakers, has sometimes had trouble with newly launched vehicles.
So vehicle launches are super important, because if you get the problems right before you go to launch, you're not firefighting. It's much harder to get those problems fixed when those vehicles are out in society. Super important. And some automakers do launches better than others. So automakers such as Toyota seem to do very, very good. And really the reason is that a lot of those Toyota launches are quite conservative. They're not changing everything. Problem is with automakers such as Ford, they tend to go out with a new platform, new infotainment system, new powertrains, and do a lot at the same time. That's very hard for any automaker to get all those things right.
Explorer sales fell 48% in the third quarter of 2019 compared with the same quarter in the year previous. That is bad news, given that the Explorer is something of a cash cow for Ford.
This resulted in a very, very challenging launch for the Explorer, which was very unfortunate for Ford, because the Explorer is a core nameplate for the brand. It's a very crucially important vehicle for Ford. And because the next generation of parents, namely millennials, finally entering the new vehicle marketplace and now having families, the market is ripe for this next generation of family buyers to get into three-row SUVs. And unfortunately, this challenging launch situation delayed Ford getting these vehicles into the marketplace as quickly as they would have wanted to.
It showed in the company's third quarter earnings. Ford acknowledged the trouble implementing its plans at the factory on a call with investors in October, but referred to the trouble as a unique situation.
And simply put, with the product going from front-wheel drive to rear-wheel drive architecture, all new assembly line, all new body shop, all those things at once, we took on too much and we shouldn't have. And so part of the lessons learned is obviously go back to, how we manage these launches and sequence them in a way that gives the team a chance to be successful.
The company won't reveal what kinds of margins it gets on the vehicle, but the Explorer is one of Ford's highest volume products. SUVs tend to be more profitable products than sedans overall. Customers have so far seemed to be willing to pay higher prices for SUVs and crossovers than they have been for similarly sized passenger cars. In addition, the wide range of trim levels available on the Explorer also give Ford the chance to charge a range of prices for different features. Higher trim versions of the vehicles tend to be quite profitable for the automaker. It's worth noting that half of all Explorer sales in the third quarter were ST and Platinum. Ford told CNBC in January 2020 that the Explorer ST was beating sales expectations, comprising 21% of retail sales. The automaker also said about 90% of Aviator sales in the fourth quarter of 2019 were for its two highest trim levels, Reserve and Black Label. Things did improve in the fourth quarter. Sales were still down 14.6% with the fourth quarter of 2018, but that was a pretty dramatic rebound from the dismal performance in the third. Ford told CNBC December was the Explorer's strongest month for retail sales since the vehicle's launch in June. It was the best month for Aviator as well, and the Aviator is quickly becoming the best-selling vehicle in the Lincoln portfolio, based on December sales results. But in the end, Ford lost its leading position in the midsize SUV segment.
And that's an interesting thing about Ford. It's kind of like two sides of the coin. Now, while Ford does make a lot of changes, it makes their vehicles quite desirable. In fact, Ford has some of the best suspension tuning on the market. These are cars that drive very well. These are cars that are quiet. These cars that ride very well, handle very well. But making all of these changes, again, that impacts reliability. And we've had problems on a lot of our new Fords, even our fleet vehicles. We don't do reliability from the vehicles that we purchase, but we're no different. We see these problems too.
The botched launch comes at a time when many investors feel as though Ford is still very much in the midst of a turnaround. The automaker's results for the fourth quarter of 2019 missed Wall Street expectations, and its full-year guidance for 2020 also disappointed investors. Some industry analysts have complained of a lack of transparency around Ford's plans for its future, including its cost-cutting measures and its attempts to turn around its struggling international businesses, particularly in China. Ford is also investing heavily in ambitious projects with no obvious immediate payout, such as autonomous vehicle technology. A bit more near in the future, the troubled launch raises some questions about launches scheduled over the next few years. There is the expected launch of the Mach-E, Ford's first fully electric vehicle, and its bid to compete with rising electric car juggernaut Tesla. The Mach-E is a totally new type of vehicle for the 100-year-old automaker. The automaker told CNBC its recent launch of the Escape compact SUV has been flawless, and it expects the Mach-E launch to be the same. Ford is also planning to launch more SUVs and trucks, which are segments where Ford concentrates most of its energy, arguably competes most effectively, and, say industry analysts, pulls most of its profits. The Blue Oval is planning to release a new version of its F-Series, the best-selling lineup of pickup trucks of any size in the US, and some would say Ford's most important brand by far. Ford has ambitious plans for the F-Series as well, including a hybrid version and eventually a fully electric one. In addition, the much-hyped Ford Bronco is scheduled to be released in the spring of 2020. Ford has been teasing the truck since at least 2017. In February, Ford unexpectedly said that its president for automotive, Joe Hinrichs, would retire. Hendricks had frequently been named as one of the top 2 or 3 potential successors to CEO Jim Hackett. Manufacturing and operations were among Hendricks' responsibilities, and some in the industry blamed the botched launch for the sudden announcement. The botched launch comes at a time when some observers are warning of larger industry headwinds. Since the U.S. economy recovered from the 2008 financial crisis and ensuing recession, automakers have increasingly stuffed their portfolios with trucks and sport utility vehicles in response to growing demand from consumers. But some industry analysts note the new car market is getting crowded, and these vehicles are becoming expensive. In an environment like this, automakers cannot afford to stumble.